When you think of modern Iran, what's the first thing that really springs to mind?
Well, for most people, I think the image is, it's pretty focused, isn't it?
It's this idea of a geopolitical antagonist.
Right, a nation that's, dedicated to resisting the West, maybe pursuing nuclear weapons, mastering drone warfare.
And, of course, a declared enemy of the United States. It's a country we tend to define by its religious rules and that friction with the outside world.
That narrative absolutely dominates the global conversation. And, I mean, you can see why. But like any good story, every so-called villain has an origin, a backstory.
And this is where it gets interesting.
It really is. Because here's the controversial, almost forgotten fact we have to start with. For a huge, pivotal part of its modern history, Iran wasn't an enemy. It was, kind of astonishingly, an American friend.
And not just any friend, but a really crucial piece on the global chessboard. This is the deep dive, and today we're doing a deep, critical unpacking of Iran's complicated and, frankly, tragic history.
Exactly. The source material we're working from gives us this incredibly detailed geopolitical analysis. It connects a whole century of resource theft, foreign-run coups, and then this whiplash of top-down modernization.
And it traces that line right up to the youth-led uprisings we see in Iran today.
Our mission here is to move past the simple headline of 1979 and look at 4 crucial interconnected eras that really built modern Iran. This deep dive is so much more than a history lesson.
It's a geopolitical case study.
It is. It really exposes the catastrophic price a nation pays when it starts confusing temporary global interests with real friendship and sacrifices its own strategic autonomy in the process.
So let's frame the big question for you, the learner, right at the start. When did Iran actually become the antagonist in the West story? And maybe more importantly, when did its own path? When did it get so fatally compromised?
Was it the Islamic Revolution in 1979, or do you go back further?
Right. Does it really begin with the CIA coup that crushed democracy in 1953?
Or does the real root of the problem, the systemic issue, go all the way back to that first act of resource exploitation in 1901? Let's unpack this complicated history, starting right at the beginning.
So to really get Iran's modern story, you have to start with its physical reality.
It's geography.
Yeah.
In geopolitics, location is destiny, right?
Yeah.
And Iran's position was both its biggest weakness and, at the same time, its most powerful strength.
Yeah, if you pull up a world map from the mid-20th century, you see it immediately. After World War II, the whole global power structure was it was unrecognizable.
The old guard, Britain and France, they were completely weakened.
Britain was basically bankrupt, living on American loans, and France's gold was literally sitting in U.S. vaults for safekeeping.
Exactly. And into that power vacuum steps the United States, and it's rapidly looking for stable, reliable allies to anchor its new global leadership.
And Iran becomes the prize asset.
An immense prize. Its geopolitical value was just off the charts. It sits right on the southern border of the Soviet Union, which makes it a perfect listening post for the U.S. during the Cold War.
The containment policy.
Precisely. And maybe even more important was the oil. It controlled the energy lifeline of the future. Whoever controlled Tehran was going to control the fuel for the whole world's industrialization.
Plus its location, linking the Middle East to Asia. It's a strategic bridge.
America was shopping for friends, and Iran was at the top of the list.
But the U.S. was kind of a latecomer to this party, wasn't it?
A very latecomer. Long before Washington was interested, it was the British Empire running the show, and they had set a long precedent of treating Iran's resources as well as their own personal property.
Which brings us to the moment where modern Iran's tragedy really kicks off. The Darcy concession.
This isn't just some boring legal document. This is the physical act that defined colonial resource theft.
So what was it exactly?
Okay, so it was signed in May 1901. A British entrepreneur, William Knox Darcy, he makes a deal directly with the Shah of Iran.
And the terms.
The terms were just breathtakingly predatory. Darcy was granted the exclusive right to find, extract, and export all oil found in Iran.
All of it.
All of it, across a huge swath of the country. And in return, the Shah got a measly 16% of the annual net profits.
The source material calls this Lagan-style exploitation. It's a reference to that story about the absurd taxes the British put on Indian villagers.
It's a perfect analogy. It shows a level of theft so complete that the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which grew out of this deal, really did treat Iran like its own personal petrol pump right from the early 1900s.
And it wasn't just about the volume of oil they were taking.
No, not at all. It was about the financial manipulation that guaranteed Iranian wealth never actually developed Iran. The Shahs were kept in power by foreign loans they had to repay using future oil money. It was a perpetual debt trap.
Okay, I want to dig into the mechanics of that financial shell game because the numbers are just shocking. The sources mention the 1931 annual report for the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company.
Right.
They claimed their reported profit for the whole year was just 366 pounds. Yet, the tax they paid to Iran was 1 million pounds.
Yeah.
How does that even make sense?
It doesn't. Not in any kind of legitimate accounting system. It's a classic example of sophisticated corporate fraud, probably through things like transfer pricing and complex subsidiary structures.
Okay, break that down.
Well, they were legally obligated to give Iran a percentage of net profits. So by setting up a shell company in London, for example, they could sell the crude oil to their own sister company for almost nothing.
Ah, so they deflate the reported profits in Iran down to that 366 pounds.
Exactly. Then the sister company in London sells it on the global market for the real massive profit, and Iran sees none of it.
So the 366-pound profit was a legal fiction to avoid paying royalties.
A complete fiction. And the 1 million pounds in tax was a separate deal, probably to cover the Shah's pre-existing European debts and keep him dependent. The Iranian people saw almost none of their country's actual wealth.
This whole system was designed to keep the nation in debt and compliant.
And it shows you how colonialism had already shifted from physical control to these incredibly sophisticated financial weapons.
But a system like that couldn't last forever. The Darcy contract was set to expire in 1961 and talks about a new deal we're starting.
And that's when we get this brief, shining moment of genuine Iranian nationalism.
The rise of Mohammad Mossadegh.
Exactly. He becomes prime minister in 1951, and he sees that just negotiating for a slightly better percentage is still playing their game.
So he decides to challenge the whole thing.
On the world stage, he takes Iran's case to the International Court of Justice.
His argument was fundamentally simple, wasn't it?
Profoundly simple. He said Iranian oil is the sovereign natural resource of the Iranian people. The original contract was exploitative and invalid, and Iran should have the right to control its own destiny.
A direct challenge to the entire post-colonial power structure.
And the outcome at the ICJ was so telling. The court basically said it had no jurisdiction.
So they just punted it back to Iran.
They did. They said it was an internal matter for the Iranian parliament. So Mossadegh, with massive popular support, wasted no time. Iran unanimously voted to nationalize its oil industry.
And we know what happens when a developing nation does that.
The reaction from the old imperial powers is always swift and brutal. Britain, losing its personal petrol pump, went straight to its new big brother,
The United States.
and that's Operation Ajax, 1953. The CIA, working with Britain's MI6, orchestrated a coup.
They didn't invade, though.
No, they used propaganda, they bribed officials, and they activated military units loyal to the Shah. Mossadegh, the democratically elected leader who stood up for his country's resources, was swiftly arrested and thrown in prison.
And just like that, control is handed back to the young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
That single event, Operation Ajax, did two critical things. It cemented the Shah as America's man, their friend, their puppet.
But at the same time, it completely derailed Iran's democratic path before it even got started.
That moment in 1953, the reversal of national will by a foreign power, you could argue that's the first true fatality point for modern Iran.
So with Operation Ajax, we move into the second era. 26 years of autocratic rule under the Shah, who was fully backed, financed, and armed by the U.S.
And Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was the perfect Western partner for them.
His background is key here. He was educated in Europe, spoke fluent French.
His entire lifestyle, his clothes, his parties, it was all completely westernized. He pushed what was seen as the American style of living from the top down.
So he was the symbol of modernity and Western freedom.
He was the poster child for American influence in the entire Middle East. In fact, he was so aligned with U.S. interests that he basically acted as America's ambassador in the Gulf.
Right, he was encouraging other nations, like Saudi Arabia, to also line up with Washington.
He was, but the sources highlight this really critical, almost prophetic warning he got from the Saudi king at the time, King Faisal.
What did you say?
The king told him, and I'm paraphrasing, "I appreciate your advice, but you are not the Shah of France. You are not in LA. You are in Iran. Your population is 90% Muslim. Please don't forget that."
Wow. And that just perfectly captures the Shah's fatal mistake.
It does. His rapid forced modernization wasn't seen as progress by most Iranians. It was seen as cultural erasure. It alienated that huge 90%, the rural, the traditional, the religious classes.
They felt their entire identity was being dismissed, scorned even.
And this taps into a deeper psychological dynamic that you see in a lot of formerly colonized nations. The source material calls it mental colonization.
Mental colonization. Let's dig into that. What does that actually mean?
It's about internalizing the trauma of imperialism. It's more than just foreign companies on your soil. It's the subconscious belief that the Western way of life, their clothes, their music, their products, are just inherently better than your own.
Regardless of actual quality or cost.
Exactly. And the Shah's policies are a perfect illustration. His white revolution tried to modernize the country so fast, but it often meant forced secularization.
He promoted Western dress codes, for example.
Right, actively diminishing traditional clothing and religious observance in public life. The government favored Western-educated elites for all the top jobs. The message was clear. To succeed in the Shah's Iran, you had to act Western.
And while he's pushing this from the palace, opposition is building. And we have to talk about his secret police, Savak.
Yes. Savak was the Shah's brutal instrument of oppression. It was initially trained by the CIA and later by Israeli intelligence, which made it extremely efficient.
Its job was just to crush all dissent.
Complete suppression. Savak was infamous for surveillance, arbitrary arrests, and systemic torture of political opponents. So while the rich in Tehran got modernity, the price was paid in the dungeons.
Which solidified this idea that the regime was just a foreign-backed dictatorship, no matter how modern it looked.
And that climate of terror and cultural alienation created the perfect opening for an alternative vision. This is where Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini comes in.
And Khomeini was so effective because he was the perfect opposite of the Shah.
The perfect antithesis. The Shah was distant, European. Khomeini connected with the common people on this deep moral level. He offered a clear alternative identity for Iran. Anti-West, anti-imperial, and morally pure.
And his 14 years in exile were a huge strategic advantage for him.
A gift. It created this powerful, heroic story. It built up immense sympathy. People saw him as this figure who was suffering for their national and religious identity, while the Shah was enjoying Western luxury.
And the genius of his rhetoric wasn't just political.
No, this is critical. He didn't just call the Shah a dictator. That might only appeal to, say, university students. He called the Shah un-Islamic.
So he's accusing him of destroying Iran's very soul.
Precisely. And that religious framing mobilized the vast, traditional 90% of the population that King Faisal had warned him about. It made the revolution a spiritual necessity.
So the stage is set, and we get to the tipping point in 1978.
The Shah makes a massive political mistake. In January 1978, he gets a government newspaper to publish an article calling Khomeini a traitor and a foreign agent.
It was meant to discredit him, but it backfired.
Hugely. It triggered massive street protests across the country, a classic case of how an aggressive media attack can catalyze regime change.
And as everything starts to spiral, the Shah, America's trusted friend, turns to Washington for help.
He does. He asks for military, financial, political support, but Washington hesitates.
Why?
This is such a devastating moment. The U.S. had just lost the war in Vietnam. They were humiliated. The government was just not willing to risk another international intervention, propping up yet another unpopular dictator.
The political cost was just too high.
Exactly. And this is the key takeaway. America did not back its friend. The Shah had served his purpose, but when the political winds changed, he was expendable. The cost of that friendship proved fatal.
He fled Iran in January 1979, and his rule officially ended on February 11th.
Which brings us into the third era. The seismic shift of the Islamic Revolution. And the first thing that happens is crucial. In March 1979, an incredible 98.2% of the people voted to create an Islamic republic.
That number, 98.2%.
Right.
It's almost unanimous. But it can be misleading, can't it? It wasn't 98% of people demanding a fundamentalist theocracy.
Not at all. That's the crucial context. The majority wasn't a solid block of religious fanatics. It was a massive, diverse coalition of everyone who was fed up.
So you had secular liberals, journalists, students, the urban poor.
Even Marxist groups, they were all unified by one thing. Pure frustration with the Shah's corrupt puppet regime, the brutality of Savak, and the humiliation of foreign control.
They were all united by the idea that anything is better than the regime.
That's it. They saw the Islamic Republic as a vehicle for national liberation, not necessarily as a cage of religious ideology.
And that allowed for this immediate dramatic change. Iran's identity shifts overnight from a monarchy to a theocratic state.
And the clergy, led by Khomeini, immediately began to consolidate power. The initial dream, the stated goal, was to revive an authentic Iranian identity and stop being a cheap copy of Europe.
But that vision soured very quickly.
Power consolidation was relentless. Khomeini systematically rewrote the constitution, centralizing control over the laws, the media, the culture, all future elections. And for the average Iranian who hoped for liberal change, the outcome was bitterly ironic.
Conditions in many ways became even worse than under the Shah, especially when it came to freedom of speech.
And the mechanism they put in place to make sure this religious control was permanent was the Guardian Council. This is the real engine room of the theocratic state.
This is so critical to understanding Iran today. Let's break down how it works.
Okay, so the Guardian Council has 12 members. 6 are Islamic jurists appointed directly by the supreme leader. The other 6 are lawyers nominated by the head of the judiciary, who is also appointed by the supreme leader, and then approved by parliament.
So the religious authority is baked into the structure.
It's always paramount. And the new constitution gave this council 3 incredible overarching powers that basically cancel out any democratic vote.
Let's go through them. Number 1, veto power over legislation.
This means even if the elected parliament passes a popular progressive bill, the Guardian Council can just kill it instantly if they say it's not compatible with Islamic law.
So the parliament is fundamentally powerless if the council disagrees.
Completely subservient. Then there's number 2. They supervise all elections, and that's not just counting votes. It means ensuring the entire process fits their ideology.
And then the third and most powerful one.
The power to approve or disqualify any candidate for any election.
Any candidate.
For president.
For parliament.
Any candidate. If you're seen as too liberal, too secular, or just not loyal enough to the system, you're simply disqualified before a single vote is ever cast.
The effect is just chilling. It's absolute control.
It is. Elected leaders can only operate under strict religious supervision, and the rhetoric's solidified. To oppose the system was to oppose Allah, and to support the old enemies, America and the Shah. It effectively shut down legitimate political debate for decades.
So let's fast forward to today, to what some are calling the 5th era of Iran. It feels like history is repeating itself in this really chilling way.
You see the current regime making the same fatal errors as the Shah.
The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, seems completely disconnected from the people. And his response to dissent is the same old playbook.
Crackdowns, mass arrests, harsh punishments. It's the same cycle of oppression that always ends up destabilizing a regime.
And just like in 1979, the movement today is driven by young people. But now, the crisis is supercharged by a complete economic collapse.
The numbers are terrifying for the average person. You're looking at food inflation of 70%. Think about what that does to a family's budget.
It's unsustainable. And the currency has collapsed. It's 1.4 million rial to buy a single US dollar.
Which makes importing anything, medicine, technology, spare parts, basically impossible for businesses and completely out of reach for regular people.
The World Bank is predicting a GDP contraction. That means more unemployment, more failing businesses, more desperation.
It's the perfect storm. Economic desperation combined with severe social restrictions, which all came to a head in 2022 with the Woman Life Freedom Movement.
Zandadi Azadi.
Right, and the social restrictions are just extreme. The state's morality police enforce these incredibly harsh rules on what people can wear, how they can socialize.
And the penalties for women who violate the mandatory hijab laws are just shocking.
We're talking huge fines, up to 15 years in jail, seizing 10% of your assets, and in some cases, even the death penalty.
And the catalyst that lit the fuse was the death of Mahsa Amini in September 2022.
She was arrested by the Guidance Patrol, the moral police, for supposedly wearing her headscarf improperly. And reports suggest she died in police custody from a brutal beating.
In that moment of tension, she instantly became the martyr.
As the sources point out, every successful revolution, whether it's organic or engineered, needs 3 things: a symbol, a clear villain, and a martyr.
And Mahsa Amini's death provided that galvanizing focal point, especially for a generation that has only ever known the clerical regime.
And you hear young Iranians today saying the exact same thing people said in 1979. Anything is better than this regime.
So this level of unrest forces us to ask a very sensitive geopolitical question. How much of this is a purely organic uprising? and how much might fall into that long history of external interference, the CIA playbook?
It's a valid question. We have to look at it through the theory of the boiling frog.
Explain that.
The idea is if you throw a frog into boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in lukewarm water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog never notices the gradual change until it's too late.
And that's the model for modern psychological operations for regime change.
Exactly. Don't launch a sudden attack that unites the country. Instead, slowly increase the internal friction. Fuel protests, amplify divisions, increase unrest, until the regime either collapses on its own or it gives you political cover to intervene.
And we have to be impartial here. We'll probably never know the full truth about the current protests until documents are declassified, maybe 50 years from now.
We won't. But we can look at the declassified CIA manuals for psychological operations to understand the historical playbook.
And what do they say?
They detail specific tactics, things like hiring local goons or thugs to start trouble and escalate violence, which forces the state to crack down and look tyrannical.
They also talk about using art, culture, and music to spread ideas and bypass state censorship.
They do. But the most important strategy listed, the absolute core of the operation, is the need to find a martyr.
And the alignment of the current protests with that playbook is compelling. Masa Amini as the central tragic figure, the use of art and social media. It certainly mirrors factors that external powers have historically exploited.
It's context, not proof. But it's crucial context for understanding the global interests at play today.
And those interests are actively posturing. The exiled son of the former Shah is lobbying U.S. politicians, asking him to invade Iran.
And you hear it in the rhetoric from people like Donald Trump. He said, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go.
It's a clear signal of potential intervention, framed as humanitarian aid.
And the geopolitical prize for any U.S. administration is enormous. If you liberate Iran, a country supposedly developing nuclear weapons and making world-class drones, you're seen as a hero on the world stage.
A president could win a Nobel Peace Prize for something like that. It completely changes the narrative around U.S. foreign policy.
The stakes couldn't be higher, which is why the ghost of Operation Ajax looms so heavily over everything that's happening now.
And this entire cyclical history of Iran, from a British colony to a U.S. puppet to a theocratic enemy, it all just culminates in one of the most famous and most sobering quotes in modern geopolitics.
From Henry Kissinger, "To be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal."
Let's spend some real time unpacking that quote using the exact history we've just laid out, because Iran proves his point perfectly.
It does. In the 1950s, Iran was America's friend, or more accurately, its puppet. U.S. interests then were about controlling oil and containing the Soviets. So the U.S. was actively dangerous on Iran's behalf, staging the coup to install its friend.
But by 1979, the Shah, who was still officially America's friend, was suddenly left out in the cold.
He was abandoned. Why? Because U.S. interests had shifted. The country was traumatized by Vietnam, risk-averse, and unwilling to be seen propping up another unpopular dictator.
So that abandonment, that withdrawal of support, was fatal to the Shah.
It led directly to his downfall. It is the ultimate geopolitical warning. When the friend becomes politically inconvenient, the relationship is over.
Regardless of decades of loyalty.
America, like any major power, will always put its own interest first. And this isn't a partisan thing.
No. The source materials cite a recent bill in the U.S. Congress to put massive 500% tariffs on anyone buying Russian oil.
And Republicans and Democrats are united on it. If a foreign deal is perceived to hurt American interests, they will act aggressively, and they don't care about the consequences for their allies.
It just reinforces that key geopolitical mantra every nation has to internalize.
In geopolitics, there are no permanent friends, only temporary interests. The tragedy of Iran is that its leaders consistently confuse the two.
So let's turn to the lessons from all this, especially for developing nations trying to find their footing.
The first lesson is absolute. Strategic autonomy and control over your own resources are non-negotiable.
Iran's experience with the Darcy concession is a direct parallel to what happened in other colonies. Look at India. The British systematically dismantled its industries.
India's share of the world's GDP fell from about 25% before the British to less than 4% when they left in 1947.
That drop was due to systemic resource theft and economic suppression.
And the form of imperialism has just evolved. Today, you don't need to control the land. You control the resources, the data, the economies through complex financial deals and trade agreements that are stacked in your favor. It's the new Darcy concession.
So when a nation stands up and demands control of its own resources or sets its own policies, it's not being antagonistic.
No, it's practicing necessary self-reliance. It's learning the lesson Iran learned a century ago. If you don't control your own destiny, someone else will.
The second massive lesson from Iran's history, maybe surprisingly, is about the domestic defense industry.
Right. Iran has been under crushing sanctions for decades, cut off from the world.
And yet, despite that isolation, they've managed to develop world-class military capabilities, including those advanced drones that are now a major global factor.
Which raises a really critical question for a country like India, which isn't under sanctions. If a sanctioned Iran can build a robust, self-reliant defense industry, why can't an unsanctioned major power that spends trillions on defense do the same?
It comes right back to that idea of mental colonization we talked about.
It does, but applied to defense buying. There's this massive reliance on importing incredibly expensive foreign gear instead of funding domestic alternatives.
The source material notes India is spending a colossal sum, about 3,025,000 crores, on French Rafale jets.
Now, just imagine if a fraction of that money was aggressively channeled into domestic research and development and manufacturing.
You'd build a strategic industry at home, and you'd save massive amounts of foreign currency.
But the reliance continues this subconscious idea that the imported stuff is always better, even when sanctioned states like Iran prove that domestic ingenuity can rise to the challenge.
The analysis suggests the real shame is in constantly going back to the very nations that historically got rich by looting your resources in the first place.
And strategic autonomy in defense is the ultimate insurance policy. Because the moment a real conflict starts is when you find out who controls the supply chain for your spare parts.
So let's bring it all together. What's the final synthesis of this journey?
We've gone through 4 eras, and each one is defined by the same crushing cycle. External powers meddle, a proxy regime forces rapid, unrooted change, and the public backlash leads to a violent revolution.
And through it all, it's the Iranian people who have been punished, no matter who was in charge.
We started by asking when Iran became the villain. Let's return to that for a final thought.
Was the most destructive moment the revolution in 1979? Or was it the CIA coup in 1953 that set the precedent that the national will could just be ignored?
Or do you go all the way back to the original sin, that resource theft of the Darcy concession in 1901 that set up the entire model of subservience?
Or, as some historians might argue, does the cycle go back even further, to the persecution of the native Zoroastrians centuries ago? The point is, the wrongs in Iran are deep and systemic.
They're rooted in this fatal combination of external meddling and catastrophic internal leadership that refuse to prioritize its own people.
The real lesson for any nation seeking stability and sovereignty is clear.
You have to secure your own destiny, and never ever confuse temporary global interests with true permanent friendship. Because, as Iran's history shows, when those interests shift, relying on a powerful friend can indeed be fatal.